Welcome to another episode of Take Up Space. Today in the studio, we have Vikash Ravi, who's a licensed clinical social worker and a colleague who works in the space of therapy for the past 8 or 9 years. And he specializes in working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence, especially in the South Asian community. So this is a really timely episode because it's the month of April. It's the month of sexual assault awareness, and it just happens to happen at this time. So I'm going to pass it over to him and just say thank you for being here.
I mean, I'm such a fan of this. This is crazy. I watched all the episodes and stuff.
You watched all the episodes?
So that you've put out so far.
Should I quiz you?
No. I watched them. I wasn't studying them. It was a completely different situation.
I appreciate you for watching them. And you were really excited when we first talked about it.
Yes. The excitement has maintained this entire... I'm such a big fan of this.
Oh, I love that.
This is awesome.
And I have to tell our listeners that you came and did this in the middle of a very big life milestone,
yes,
big change, a move, yes,
and a wedding. I did get married a little bit under 2 weeks ago.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Honestly, still floating.
Yeah.
Still float. We're moving in together right now too with all of this. I think it's only really going to sink in after we've had a week or a couple of weeks of normalcy with that routine.
Right.
Right now it's just been a
chaos.
Schedule kind of. And it feels like retroactively we'll have a lot more time to be able to sink into oh my God, we're married kind of thing. But right now it's just timelines.
Yeah. Have you guys been dating for a really long time?
Yeah, we've been dating since 2019.
2019.
So we were together
but it's 6 years.
That's 6 years. It's going to be 6 years dating in August. So
wow.
We actually met and we're dating for about 6 months before, or 6 to 8 months before COVID hit. So majority of our relationship was actually pandemic onwards.
Yeah. How was that? Did you guys spend time together?
Yeah, I mean, we were able to. It was definitely hard, but we had to when we were dating, there wasn't a lot. We were also long distance too.
Oh wow!
So we were in long distance. COVID and long distance. Yeah. I was in Houston. She's in Dallas at the time.
Yeah.
So we met in person once every few months if we could manage it, but we had to prep for it a little bit because protocols and then just finding a place to go, try to make it outdoors. Hopefully the weather was good. It was a whole thing. But I mean, it was fun. It was actually kind of fun trying to navigate that.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting because we were both very interested to want to make that happen with each other, which was a pretty solid indication early on that we were this is probably
it. Yeah. No, I think if you make it through COVID, this is a lot.
Yeah. We front ended that as in our relationship. So we're good probably. We could just do whatever at this point. So
literally. Does it feel any different now? Or is it too soon?
I think probably too. I think the biggest thing was actually we had not lived together before this.
Oh, that's a big. It's a big.
So that's probably where the biggest change is, and we're still getting accustomed to just acclimate. We're moving in right now. As soon as I'm done with the episode, going back.
You're going back to move.
Yeah,
oh my God.
I have to unpack for the next 2 days.
Yeah.
So I think that part, and there's a lot of excitement, but also very much an awareness of growing pains around just us acclimating to what our day-to-day routines are.
Right.
Even if we know what they are, living with it is obviously
it's a different thing. Yeah. I'm super excited for you. And thank you for doing this in the middle of all of these things you have going on.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I really
You're so excited.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start us off with some statistics that I think are important just to share and bring to the surface for this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm pulling from RAINN, which is RAINN, and it's the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. And I'm going to pull some just definitions and statistics from there that I think are really powerful to hear. So every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. On average, CPS finds evidence of sexual assault every 9 minutes. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime, and 1 out of every 10 rape survivors are male. So those are obviously chilling statistics, and they say a lot just on their own. But I do want to take a second to just define what I mean and what I'm talking about when I say sexual assault. So that's under the umbrella of anything that's unwanted or lacks consent, of touching, advances, or even penetration into someone else. And there are core elements of what lack of consent means, and there's not a lot of education around what that could look like. I'll admit that I didn't know years ago exactly what could be under that umbrella. For example, being intoxicated or being under any substance, or having some sort of impairment, being a child, being a minor. There's all these things where you can't give consent. And I think that is something we forget and we don't talk about, especially in the South Asian community. We just don't talk about sex, period. So talking about sexual assault is like a whole other level. So just kind of starting through those stats and that definition, I guess I want to ask you, Vikash, what drew you to the work in this field, particularly with survivors of sexual violence and South Asians?
Yeah, well, so I actually started off. So when I finished my program, one of the things that I didn't get a lot of chance to work with while I was in grad school was South Asian mental health. So it started off as an interest of like trying to find somewhere to do South Asian mental health. And my program, I did it all out of Houston.
Gotcha.
And so in Houston, though, at the time when I Googled like South Asian mental health agencies, organizations, somewhere I could
something specific to
something specific. The only organization that I found at the time, so this is 2018, was DIA Houston, which and they are specifically sexual violence advocacy and empowerment work for South Asians.
For South Asians. Yeah.
So I wanted to do South Asian mental health, and this just happened to have both of the intersections. So it wasn't even specifically like I was looking to do sexual violence work.
Sure.
It was more from the lens of I want to do South Asian mental health work.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to them, and there was a process of, I mean, they were hiring, it kind of worked out, and then I got in through that.
Okay. And was that because you are South Asian, so you wanted to like...
Yes.
I think related better to that community?
Yeah. One, related better. Two, noticing that a lot of the training that I was getting was not at all applicable to like what...
No, for real. All the
like
research done in psychology early on is not diversified.
Not at all. And what was really good about it and what really brought this out, this understanding of like, wow, we do need population specific stuff is like, in 2018, my primary internship before I went to DIA, like during school, was at somewhere called the Montrose Center. It's Houston's main Montrose Center. It's Houston's main LGBTQIA plus center, nonprofit.
Yeah.
Great place. I had a wonderful mentor, still in touch with him.
Nice.
But prior to that, I was not at all like exposed to just queer culture as a concept and understanding any of that. So it was really wonderful to be immersed in that because even though I had the like inclination towards allyship, having no experience of immersion and having no space to know where to even begin that was, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know. And then I went there and I'm like, oh, I get stuff now.
Yeah.
And then realizing I don't know that South Asians have a space where someone else can come in and experience all this in the context of also providing like mental health services.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So then it feels
like that's a very rare find.
Which is why it was interesting because DIA, it happens to like they started off as a South Asian survivors empowerment focused situation based off of like a murder suicide essentially that happened in 1998. It was a group of women, South Asian women, who were like, we need to do something about it. And the murder suicide, the context of it was from an abusive relationship.
Gotcha.
So and I should say too, DIA isn't just sexual violence, they're abuse period. All South Asian abuse. So all of that being said, they created it and they got, I think, a lot of traction. From my understanding, and I could be completely wrong about this, but my understanding about especially the early days of DIA, the reason that they got a lot of traction and are able to sustain was more so because of the sexual violence and abuse work, more so than the South Asian work. Like if it was a general South Asian mental health clinic, I don't know that they would have been as successful.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because I work at the Turning Point, which is specific to sexual assault survivors.
Okay.
Not South Asians, it's open.
Yeah.
But man, oh man, I rarely see a South Asian present in the building, and it's free counseling, legal help, right? And I know that there's this stigma attached to sex in general, sexual violence, there's shame, all of that things, but I very rarely see a South Asian walk through those.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And it's not about, I think it's just the infrastructure of how counseling is set up is unintentionally a bit unwelcoming for South Asian abuse survivors. And there's also a giant intersectionality of like, at least from when I was at DIA, and I think see this in private practice, South Asian abuse survivors and like all of the things that just tend to come with the identifiers of South Asian or South Asian Americans, which is just familial piety, family enmeshment, codependence stuff.
Yeah.
And there's this unintentional, I think, immediate coldness from the counseling world built into not knowing how to do counseling with someone that has grown up in collectivism necessarily.
Yeah.
And that immediately just sort of creates a barrier. And there's a whole other conversation, which I won't jump the gun too much on this, but there's a professionalism conversation there, meaning like the more professionalism and etiquette you have in a space, the less welcoming it is for people kind of thing.
Yeah. And I noticed that with just victims in general, honestly.
Yeah.
And I come in the most casual for that reason, because they feel more welcome. I think what you're talking about is the concept of like interdependence and independence, and how it just varies from the Western culture. And I think that, to your point, like sometimes if you're trying to explain to a counselor how South Asian families work and what's going on, it can be a complete miss, right? Yeah. They can label it as codependent and enmeshment, which is fine, maybe like per definition, but there are parts of that are of value to the culture.
Yes. Yeah. And just in those terms immediately add this sort of negativity towards it, regarding like, it doesn't allow for there to be any nuance understanding, like, well, why is this enmeshment? Not to justify its existence, but to actually open up a view of understanding why this is important to someone and how we need to account and accommodate that while also doing the survivor work. And that genre of things is still just not really a thing. Yeah.
Not really a thing. I was going to say a work in progress. More generous.
You're more optimistic than I am. I will admit to like hardcore cynicism more often than not a lot of times. So there's that.
Okay. So you were at Daya.
I was at Daya.
That's how you got more acclimated to South Asians.
Yes.
And they worked on abuse, right?
Yeah.
So take me through what brought you to your own practice and just domestic and sexual victims focus. For South Asians. Yeah.
So I think I can speak for a lot of people that enter the work and just start doing abuse work. It's like once you're in it and you go through the training and the experiences of working with people, there's a lens that there's just a lens of looking at the world now that experience gives you that you just sort of see everywhere and you can't really unsee it. So it just sort of became I can't unsee this. I can't. Like, there's just, it's everywhere and it's all over the place. And it's weird because like my normal is now informed by how much I see just I think these microaggressions and interactions on every micro, meso, and macro level of like what these trainings taught me, and what the intersectionality of like the South Asian abuse and abuse work taught me, that now I'm like, I can't help but feel that like I have to just be here. So it wasn't even more so a proclivity towards like, this is something I wanted to do. It was more so like, oh no, how can I not? This is morally necessary.
Oh yeah.
And in hindsight, and I'm gonna disclaimer this next part for personal disclosure a little bit. It gave me language to interpret situations that I've been in. So longest story short, I've had my own experiences being perpetrated before, in a very, very uncommon intersectionality. So like, I'm straight. It was with my high school girlfriend, and it was with some other experiences in college, early college as well. Okay. And like a straight guy getting perpetrated as like a victim of anything is, or as a victim of like, their female partner is not really something that like people talk about or really there's a lot of attention towards. Yeah. And I didn't think much of it at the time because I was hard when it was happening. Yeah. So I was like, so I must be in it, because that's what we know, right? Right. And that's what we're taught. And even if we're not taught it, it's implied that that's the case. So I didn't know that was something that wasn't like okay, right, until I got into this, and then they gave me the language for it, and I was like, why do I feel weird and uncomfortable with what I'm learning here? Because if I allow the barriers that have compartmentalized those moments, all the protectors, and I let that language inform like what that was, then I have to maybe become more understanding of the fact that like, oh shit,
this really happened to me.
This really happened. Yeah. So all of that wrapped into the thing was like, okay, I only realized maybe a decade after the thing happened that this was even a thing that had happened to me. Right. And I didn't know that how much of myself I had blocked off because that thing had happened to me. Right. And because my brain, it did its job, right? It got me through it. But then when I learned this language, I think calling it a language is probably the easiest way to internalize it. When I learned this language, retroactively, applying it to like that experience, I think allowed for me to also understand all the things that I wasn't doing as well as I wanted to because of that experience. Like all the things that I had blocked off in my life, in other realms of life, in like my decision making just in college or whatever, that I was like, oh, this like stopped me from understanding and achieving things and being just a better person, honestly. Like there were things that I critique about my past self that I think were expressions of avoidance or denial that I didn't even know were such things.
Yeah.
And projections that I didn't know were such things.
Right.
And learning the language allowed me to go back to that, heal it, go to my own therapy for it, and now I can execute just my day-to-day existence on a level that I actually feel like just a better person for.
Yeah.
And not that I don't have empathy for my past me,
Sure.
but it's just like I didn't have any tool.
You had no idea.
I had no idea
what to call it, that it wasn't okay, that it happened. And I think, like, first of all, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I know you've worked through it. I know you're good.
Yeah, I'm chilling.
You're chilling, you're vibing.
Yeah.
But
I got married 2 weeks ago. I'm good, dude.
But I do think that it still takes a level of courage to share. I think it takes a level of resilience to come on the other side of it and say, these are all the ways in which healing benefited me and how I'm giving back to others. So
yeah,
I do want to pause and give you kudos.
I appreciate that.
I was going to say, like, it's so sad sometimes. It's heartbreaking for men especially. I understand that like sexual assault through those stats is more common with women, at least what's reported.
Sure,
and
yeah.
We don't even know if what's reported is fully like representing. Fair. But when it comes to men, it's like I feel like there's both this notion of it won't be believed or it might even be made fun of just because if it's with a woman, it should be fun. If I was hard, it should have been good. Like, you know, the room for like, I didn't consent to that or I was taken advantage of. I feel like there's no space for that for men at times. Yeah. I think it makes it so much harder to heal. So I'm curious for you, like now that you went through this journey, you know, when you talk to clients, like, do you see male clients, one, and then like two, what do you say to people and what do you think we can do as a collective to normalize that more for men?
Yeah. So one, I do see it more or not more, but I see it, period.
Yeah.
I think it is less about putting attention to like saying, hey, you can say this specific thing to me and more about just the way that you kind of bring the vibe of the room in.
Yeah.
Like people will naturally
open up
if it's comfortable. So for me, it always just comes back to like, I'm coming at from a place of like warmth. And I actually, even when I do client consults, the way that I have felt best describes how I like to describe what therapy is, especially for people that had come in before. I say like, my job is to caretake the room that you're entering into. So I'm just trying to like make this as open of a space as possible so that you can bring yourself in, fill it up with whatever you want. And my job is to upkeep that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great.
So sweet.
It's great.
I was like, all my problems.
And I'm like, it's a piece of art. I'll hang it up on the wall. Where do you want it? You want to hear? And I'm just here to, and then the other analogy I use is like, you're the pilot. I'm the cartographer on the side. So you tell me where we're going and just those two things, wherever they take it, I think a lot of people surprise themselves with what they disclose in that space. And it's very apparent how little access they've had to that space once you just do that. Because that's it. So as far as normalizing it, I think it's less about normalizing language around that specifically and more about just honestly being good at the room caretaking part. And people will naturally find themselves disclosing.
No, I love that. Like creating a safe environment and holding that space. It's like beautiful that we as clinicians can create that. And it's also disheartening that that's the first time they've experienced it, right? Like to live through your life and not have had that and have to come into a room with a stranger who has skills to build that. Like, you know, there's a duality there that's both a privilege and disheartening. I was going to ask you, so not in the clinic, like in the therapy setting, but in terms of education and prevention, more on a collective level, how do you see just whether it's raising awareness or education or even just like, honestly, I love that you're speaking up today. I think I've mentioned this to you when we first talked, but you're you're South Asian, you're a male, you're a therapist. It's
a lot of stuff that doesn't normally doesn't normally go together. Yeah.
You've been a survivor yourself, and you're willing to talk about it. And I know that takes a lot of healing, as you mentioned. But like as a collective, education, prevention, just in general, what do you think would be helpful to make change or to see change, at least with the shame regarding it?
I mean, I think there's probably a more general criticism on education period around all of this.
Yeah.
That's the foundation of it. I think, so two things immediately come to mind. I think the first thing that comes to mind is a lot of provider to provider, professional to professional education around this is still extremely white.
Say it how it is.
It's just really white. And like by white, I mean there's an aesthetic that we think of when we think CEU, right? There's an aesthetic to like the PowerPoint presentation or a lecture.
Can you define that for people?
Oh, right. So CEU, Continuing Educational Unit.
Which therapists are required to do every year to keep their license.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And so there's the professional to professional, and then there's the outreach, right? Professional to client, or just professional to non-professional, or people that aren't actively practicing in the space like that.
Right.
And then there's the people to people, or like the non-professional or non-worker to non-worker sort of. So I see three sectors.
Yeah.
In each of these, I think it's the same criticism, where it's very much like the PowerPoint presentation, and there is a value to statistics, but I think they're so stats heavy that it's very unintentionally and intrinsically dehumanizing, because it sort of assigns numbers to people instead of it's so like, I think that there is something to be said about putting people in a place of discomfort and personalizing it for them, so that they know they have more access to immersing into the emotions of what it is, because it's so uncomfortable. And I think one bias, very basic foundational human bias that we struggle with and have not yet detached from our educational spaces, like in counseling, is avoidance of discomfort. I think that in order to do any of this, you have to go into it with encoding the discomfort into it, because if you can't encode the discomfort into the educational piece, you're not going to get any success out of any of the educational pieces of it. So like anecdotes are huge. Personalizing, I immediately think of like, if I told you it was someone that you know, like give me your wife's or your partner or your someone you know's name, and I'm going to tell you that, I know this is like potentially insanely triggering, but this is kind of the point, especially if you're going to be a provider in this space, is I feel like this is like something you have to be able to know. It's like, imagine that someone that you cared about went through this series of things. I'm going to describe a series of events to you, something like that, and it's terrible, right?
It's terrible,
it's
but
horrifying, and it's like, oh my God, why would I? But that's the point, especially if you want to be in the work. I think like knowing that to that level of that discomfort is probably important. There's a whole lot of ethics questions around that regarding making sure we do it in a way that like isn't just triggering people. Because then the other aspect of this too is like wounded healers are very much the ones that tend to find themselves, I think, doing this work, meaning like people that have been through the experiences themselves. So you want to be able to accommodate and account for that. But all of that being said, like, this was all the first point. The first point being encoding discomfort and allowing taking away avoidance of the discomfort and coding it in. And by that, I mean less emphasis on the PowerPoint stat line situation and more.
You're really finding like a thread that connects to them on a soul emotional level.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that people immersing into that, simulating into that is the most important, because I think the foundation of it is the best way to teach someone something is experiential more than anything else.
Agreed.
So if you can simulate some version that allows their bodies to feel all of those uncomfortable feelings that are associated with these extremely distressing things, but under the line of obviously where it's like traumatizing, but still like a discomfort they have to navigate, that will teach what it needs to. Being able to do that on this level is a whole other conversation. Right?
Yeah.
But then the second point goes into like, I actually mentioned this as the first point, personalizing it, being like, when it's your friend that is either the person that is a survivor or, more importantly, the person that is perpetrating, what do you do? How I think educating on that level is really important, because I think for a lot of people it's very easy to say I'm against abuse. Yeah. Because of course I would hope that that's a very easy thing for you to say. If not, whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to say that. But I think people find themselves flailing a little bit when they find out it's their friends that have done the abuse, or it's their someone that they care about, or someone that they previously had like a good perspective of.
Right.
And there isn't a lot. And I think part of that is because we have this sort of Disney villainified version of like what we think an abuser is, like that it is just this evil, like there's a dehumanizing sort of aspect to it.
100%.
So I think part of the education has to be, no, these are humans doing this.
Yeah.
And the foundation of this is a lot of people are truly capable of anything if you put them in the right circumstances. If you're able to put someone in that situation and then do the education, then we can actually now teach how do you make sure that there is accountability and protection and safety for survivors, while also knowing, hey, this is a person this could be someone that you cared about that's capable of doing this to someone else. Do you know how to navigate that?
Right.
And I think that needs to be the front end of the conversation. Like the first portion of this has to be, we need to humanize, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And these are people doing this. And when we do that now, how do we address it?
No, I freaking love that, because I think it's like the point of, we don't ever pause to ask why, you know, or get curious with how and why this person has shown up the way that they are. And I mean that both ways. So like when you're a survivor, there's so much judgment in the world around, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you scream? Like, you know, even like there's not a lot of education around trauma responses and what our body does to make sure we're safe in a very threatening environment. Yeah. Right. And that is one hand of like, we don't ask why is, you know, why did this play out the way it did, versus just like attack someone for lying or for, I don't know, embellishing something. And on the other hand of a perpetrator, we don't pause to ask like,
what has to be true about you to be able to do something
who hurt you, and what did you go through that your lens of life is like, I'm going to, you know, abuse and manipulate people to gain something. I mean, yes, that, like, to your point, it's a tricky balance, because we can't, both conversations in the same place with the survivor is like a lot, right? Because you don't ever,
and I don't think they should
invalidate. They shouldn't be in the same sentence. But I'm saying it here to say like the greater point of just pausing and asking why.
I think when it gets to that point in work, it's like, I think there is this unfortunate and unintentional association between understanding and empathy. Or like understanding and justification, where if people are asked to be able to understand why something happens, they're automatically assuming that you're asking them to find out why what someone is doing is justified. Right. And as opposed to like, no, you can understand why someone's doing something completely,
and not agree with it.
And completely not agree with it. I remember, actually, this is one that hit pretty home. With a client, I used such an extreme, it came to me in the moment. I was like, this feels like an interesting thing I'm going to try to do. I use a very extreme example of like Hitler, actually, in session. As like
I do that out at a coffee shop and I get eyes. So tell me more. I want to hear this.
I use this, the example I used was like, look, hopefully we know that Holocaust is not a justified situation at all. Please. And there is like, if you look into just Hitler's backstory, purely out of curiosity, you could probably connect the dots as to why this person became who he did in order to do what happened. And it's like, none of me understanding that means that I sign off on this genocide. It just allows me to understand what factors led to someone doing that, and maybe gives me some insight as to how can I prevent that from happening.
Like, what can we do to help people not get in that situation, or what's the course correction now that we are in that situation?
And this particular analogy worked really well for that client, because they're like, I don't know what you mean by this understanding and not justification thing. I'm like, let me try something with you.
I love this.
It just worked. I'm like, all right, I might have to keep this in my back pocket as a thing. But that the original question was about education, right?
Here we are.
Here we are.
I mean, I think this episode does it in a way where you are making it personal. Right? You're speaking on some of the tougher aspects and angles of it. And I think it will make people uncomfortable. I mean, I hope it does in a positive way.
I don't think it's possible for this to happen without, I think discomfort is necessary.
Agreed. I mean, like you said in your own journey, your body naturally protects itself to
Yes.
one, like, whether it's to dissociate or forget or live life and continue living life as effectively as possible to avoid confronting that truth. There are only a few things that can help those barriers break. And it's like when you see like other people, like you did, like we ran into a group of people talking about abuse and you're like, wait, like I
Yeah.
feel some type of way. Yeah. Yeah. And I just love that you're doing that for people.
I try. I think we're both sort of in that space. I
Yeah, we are.
imagine.
I don't know. I give you more credit, but yeah, we are. What is
about all that, but
what has been like your biggest like that you've seen as a challenge in this space, working in it?
Honestly, other providers more than anything else.
Say more.
Yeah.
What about
Yeah. It's actually the same biases I was mentioning earlier.
Gotcha.
I think that's why there's a lot of relief in private practice for me now, because I think right now I'm more specifically being a mouthpiece for my clients than I am my own specific interactions with other professionals. And also just a bit of luck that I think I've just been interacting with providers that are on the better end of things from my understanding. Because I hear some of the things that my clients tell me they've been through with other providers who have self-defined as I'm an abuse advocate or abuse work advocate.
Trauma-informed.
Trauma-informed,
Yeah,
all of this
yeah.
stuff. And then they'll tell me some of the stuff that they've done in their interactions. And I'm like,
No, actually, you're right. I've heard some stories too, and I'm just like, oh god.
I'm like, there's no, and then they're still practicing. There's no like,
Right.
it's just crazy. So
Yeah.
when I say other providers, what I specifically mean is there is still, it's the exact same concepts of like the discomfort avoidance piece where
Yeah.
there are individuals or practitioners who are saying they're trauma informed, but haven't done the work to actually be able to deal with that discomfort
yes,
well.
yes,
And will find other ways to very unintentionally, I want to optimistically say unintentionally victim blame, like the clients that walk in with certain things. And so even if it's not a direct, why didn't you leave?
yeah,
There's language that might as well be that is
Yeah.
directed towards like the clients being like, hey, I know you did, but like, what could you have done to have made a different decision in this situation? Like that's like the clinical,
yeah.
that's like their way of saying it.
It's horrible.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think part of the work too is that a lot of it is very much, and this goes back to the individualism bias, where it's like, well, you're only really in control of yourself. So, what could you have done, or what can you do, or what are the coping mechanisms that you
getting
could
angry.
have? Yeah,
I'm just hearing it. Yeah.
yeah, it's horrifying. And so that I think that's been my biggest challenge because I
Sure.
have people that walk
Yeah.
in with therapy who have had
Previous.
experience from previous therapists, and there's a lot of work that has to go into dismantling their own. They now, a lot of them, they walk in with this complex of like self victim blaming of like, no, but I didn't make a better decision in that situation, so therefore I need to,
Yeah.
or like I'm lazy, or I'm I had one person who walked in and was like, no, but my previous therapist told me that I'm a narcissist, and like that's like what I've encoded into myself. And I'm interacting with them like, I don't, what?
What?
What? How? Okay. And so the challenge has been before we get to the work,
Yeah.
actually, it's this dismantling or like this
Sure.
unlearning of this almost more toxic therapeutic frameworks.
Sure.
They shouldn't even be called therapeutic frameworks, but
Yeah.
they walk in with that. And I'm like, no, this is not it at all. Like
Yeah.
context matter, systems matter, like
Yeah.
oppression is a thing,
Right.
privilege is a thing, like all of these social factors. And I'm
Yeah.
very biased maybe too because I'm a social worker. So
Yeah.
like that's maybe where that comes from. There was no, and it seems like in their previous therapeutic experience or in a lot of that, there was no attention put towards like, what are the determinants of like why your context exists?
Right. Right.
Like I had easiest example for like a client that I can think of is I had a client who walked in with a lot of stuff and they had this large experience with therapy and all that stuff. And they came in with like language and terms defined and like they knew everything. But the one thing that we made a connection with that they didn't make before was that they grew up with in poverty, basically.
Yeah.
And as soon as we put poverty into the situation, it just completely, there was this relief
Right.
that came with it that were like, yeah, I mean, I just trying to get to food was the next goal. So whatever I needed to do to get to that
Yeah.
made sense. And as soon as we put them in a situation where they were a little bit more financially stable
Right.
and all that stuff, which all happened even before they met me, they were like, yeah, I immediately stopped all of these habits and behaviors
Yeah.
because poverty wasn't a part of it anymore.
Right. Survival wasn't.
Survival wasn't like a thing. And I'm like, yeah, so this entire dynamic of things that you were taught was like a you problem, never took into account like just your SES, which should be pretty basic when it comes.
Yeah.
So as far as like how all this becomes a challenge in the provider work, I think the biggest thing is like it's this individualism bias in addition to lack of attention to context and social determinants in therapeutic spaces.
Yeah.
And putting it all on the
client.
The client.
Yeah, I love that you said it that way. You are a social worker, clearly.
I'm very much,
I do think that any healer can only take any client as far as they've taken themselves. You know what I mean? And like I've heard that so many times.
That's a great.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
And I notice that in my work. Like I notice when I am doing, when I've like worked through a lot of deeper things that I want to, I am actually able to see more success with my clients. So it's a true reflection.
Because you know how you can actually resonate with it.
Right. I can hold space very differently and I can navigate it very differently.
Yeah.
So on this, man, there's so much I want to cover and I'm looking at stuff.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Okay. Two things quickly.
Yeah.
I think I would hate to get through this episode without talking about some of the responses that happen when we are sexually assaulted and normalizing them. So I'd love for you to expand on it, but I'll just give my little 2 cents in this work. But we hear, like we were saying, a lot about not stopping it or not, I don't know, saying something, saying no, da, 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 da. And so there's these trauma responses and just nervous system responses that are built into our body for protection, like disassociating. And one of the ones that I think don't get talked about enough in the context of sexual assault, or 2 of them, is fawning and also freezing. And both of those are more common than we think. And it would hurt me to not say this today, which is like one, fawning being where we're appeasing someone now. So it could actually on the surface look like we're enjoying it. You know, we're really like going with it. And it's usually in defense of like fighting not working or fleeing not working, or just a wired nervous system response to previous trauma, right? Where you just immediately appease. And so on the outside looking in, when you're hearing a story about someone saying they were sexually assaulted and they're fawning, like, you know, it's hard for the masses to grasp that when they don't have the education behind it. Or freezing, which is another common response, which I think is the most like reported response, where your body just kind of goes into a dead-like state. Yeah. And you're literally frozen and you don't know, you don't move and you don't participate. Yeah. And so therefore you're just out of it basically. And it's more of like the last resort that your body feels the need to do that. But again, it could be your wired response to threat. So it's like the higher level of threat, which again is subjective to person by person. So you would respond differently. I would respond differently. And the
social
higher
factors, I think, determine that.
Yes,
as
bring
well.
in the SES. And so the higher the threat, the more intense the response. And when I say intense, I mean like disconnecting. And it's so misconstrued from a public perspective. So I'm curious, like, what do you have to add to that? And maybe like, you know, I don't know if in your experience, those were some of the responses that you've been exposed to or hear clients talk about.
Yeah. Or even my own when it was happening.
Yeah, exactly. Because for me, like I've also been in a similar situation where I've been assaulted. And my response that my body went to was trying to fight. And then when that didn't work, it was fawning. And I can't begin to, and obviously work through it and all the things, but I can't begin to explain the amount of shame that comes with the fawning response, right? And so I was like, I need to mention this because it's almost like it invalidates your voice when you want to say, hey, this happened to me, and hey, I was taken advantage of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I will try to make this as concise as possible for times.
Good luck.
I think so. Mine was also fawning, but I think it was fawning very much informed by social determinants, especially of like just male sexuality and privilege, and being like, I fucked. Yeah, this is great. Like that was like this very high school boys club.
Yeah, it's like an ego thing, right?
It's an ego thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, this is like, I was hard. I've experienced this. Therefore, this is,
it's like I'm
in now, right? Like this is how this works. Especially straight guys. Jesus, straight brown boys. Oh my God. That's a whole other podcast. All right. Yeah, there's a whole club to that, right? So that's one thing. I definitely got into fawning myself, but I've always understood it to be that it's going to be one of two directions. All responses, I think, and maybe I'm generalizing, but one of two places: empowerment focused or dissociation focused.
Okay.
Dissociation focused, I think, is the one where there's a little more obvious emphasis on in the education part, because that's like the freezing, right? That's immobility. That's body's literally protecting itself by turning off senses. Makes sense. Dissociation is a protective mechanism at the end of the day. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
The empowerment focus one, I think, is the one where people get tripped up, because that's where fawning is. And by empowerment focus, I specifically mean the whole point of assault and abuse is that it's taking away control.
Your choice.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the way that our body tries to compensate is, I need to find a way to be in control of this. And that turns into fawning, sometimes hypersexuality, sometimes complete lack of sexuality, because it's like, no, I just don't want to. And anything that allows our brain to add in words of I don't want to or I want to, even if it means it's a denial of the situation, and more importantly, denial of being out of control, is our brain's understanding, right, of like, no, this is helping me, because it is.
I'm in control. There's a step to safety, pseudo safety in that way.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, in the short term, it's extremely helpful, because that's what gets us to survive the situation. And so there is a use, or not a use, there's a relevance to like, no, the version of me that was fawning when I was in the situation allowed me to get to a place a decade later to go back and understand the lack, because now I'm in a safer place to understand my lack of. If I was in it at the time, I don't know. I mean, maybe we're talking about like much more suicidal ideation, things that like would have been, and my brain was like, no, we need to survive.
We need to like hold weight to the word of survival strategy. Right. Like if we're not doing that, then that means that we're risking our lives, and whether that's depression, suicide ideation, or like whatever literally fainting, for a concept called flopping, and like all these things, like so it's truly a survival to get through that moment. So the empowerment focused one is the one where I think we need more attention to. It's so important.
Where it's like, no, we were just trying to find control. And it works. It works in the sense that it keeps us alive in the situation. In the same way that freezing does, so does this. Like, if you're experiencing all of it and the lack of control with it, our bodies and our brains are not designed to be in that state for more than very acute amounts of time. Right. And so like, it's actually, unfortunately, our body's like doing what it needs to do. So fawning is not the issue. It's our perception of, or like people's perception of fawning as like, oh, you're still the problem, where it's like, no. They're just responding. The problem was the perpetrating happening that made this person have to respond in this way. Deeper problem is like, why is this happening?
But I love the way you said that and broke down fawning in those two categories. I think that would resonate with a lot of people. And, for the healing journey around sexual assault, like forgiving or understanding, or, whatever.
I think forgiving and understanding are different things.
But both are important to the previous version of yourself that was in that situation. You know what I mean? So I'm curious, like for you, when you revisited and you healed through it, how did you forgive, understand on an emotional level? How did that work for you?
I think I've had the privilege of being a provider myself. So I say unfortunately, because it's not something that can be maybe applicable to a lot of other people too, is like that allowed me to be able to be like, let me revisit me in the same way that I would revisit someone that's walking into my room, kind of thing. Which I don't think you have to be a therapist to know how to caretake a room, but I do think it helps give you tools to do so. So I'm a huge IFS fan, inner child, parts work, all of this stuff. So internal family systems, right? Didn't define it. I should do that. And so sort of rehearsing a conversation with myself in my head and being like, I have an image of 8-year-old me, 10-year-old me, 15-year-old me, of like, whether it's yearbook photos or something that I'll like look at myself, and then I have this internal conversation of like, let me right now, the almost 30-year-old Vikash interact with the 15-year-old Vikash. And more specifically, like, there was a phrase I encountered, like, be the adult that you didn't have when you were a child. And I'm like, okay, I know that I can be that now. Let me be that person to them and see what comes up. And then what came up when I sort of just did the parts exercise of it was, this person was like, I have there's a lot of loneliness, sadness, feeling out of place, feeling unwelcome, a lot of pressure on having to go through certain male roles, whatever, all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, this sucks.
That's a lot. Yeah.
So I think it was really more so I was listening to my part.
Yep.
And the way that I would listen to someone walking into my room.
Yep. I love that.
And then it just became natural from there.
Yeah. No, this is a good bit to the last episode. We did a whole IFS thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I might not remember that.
No, but I appreciate you saying that because it ties it all together. You're giving our season like continuity.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not scripted.
This is not scripted, clearly. Yeah. So, we're at the end of this, and I typically have started this rapid fire thing. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions.
Go for it.
More casual, laid back. Thank you for all the wisdom you just gave and dropped. I think it was lovely, especially you and all the intersections that you press as a human being.
I try. I'm just here, guys.
Just vibing.
Just here.
Okay, so what is one societal message that you've picked up growing up that you now opt out of?
Oh.
Drop it.
Professional etiquette.
Oof, okay.
I don't wear... So I very intentionally walk into my...
I don't either.
Yeah. The suit and tie thing and walking to a therapy space with that, with clients or whoever, I'm like, this isn't human. I'm dropping this. Like, it's all of that. Any space where it's like requires that kind of etiquette, I'm immediately a little cynical of.
Wow.
Like, I'm like, this isn't how you're connecting to people.
Right.
So the more spaces that embrace like diversity in that way, like I mentioned, I'm a street dance person, and the street dance scene, all it does is embrace like the people, the fashion, the what they walk in. It's very much like, not just come as you are. And it's great. Like those are the scenes, and I'm like, no, this is authentically what it is to be.
Right.
Anything that starts straying away from that, I'm like, no. So
out.
I'll walk into my sessions with hoodies. I walk into my sessions consults from the first interaction. Yeah. Future tense, of course. I walk into those situations with like I walk into my consults cussing. I walk into my consults like I wear hoodies and just I'm like, yo man, this is my approach. It's a free consult, so I'm not, and I'm like, yeah, this is
Take
how
it or leave it.
Yeah, like if this works for you, great. If not, then like you might be looking for a more of an etiquette space. But personally, I'm like, I don't think that allows for connection between people. I'm very much how I present. Like this is how I present, even in sessions and all of that.
Yeah, I think honestly, what you wear and how you show up is an extension of your personality, right? And so if we're all just going to be suited up and tied up, like
you're taking the humanism out of it.
You're taking the human out of it.
What the whole is human work? What are you doing?
Okay, one more.
Yeah.
For the sake of my rapid fire desires.
You're good.
What is one thing that you do for your mental health every single day, no matter what?
Every day. Almost every day. I can't say that I have a daily routine. I will say that I do my absolute best at least 2 or 3 times a week to go to a dance space or some kind of personal hobby space as much as possible. I'm a huge video gamer. I'm really into pop culture. I also dance and stuff. So making sure there's honestly a group of us just get together and find some space at UT Dallas and and like do a session space like Cypher. So it's very, very informal. We'll find like an open area that allows music and we'll just go and
just do your thing.
Just do our thing.
Okay.
That, and then gaming is a big one. So like a lot of my social stuff is gaming.
It's gaming and dancing. Yeah. I've seen some of your dances. I've seen some of your freestyle work. Has dance been a healing mechanism for you?
I would even level that up and say it's kept me alive through. That was one of the things I realized just genuinely saved my life throughout college, especially post-abuse stuff. So like I changed my life and opened up so many avenues to like being able to understand what it is to exist as a person that I would not have had if not for the scenes and dance and like the people and the culture that I've been the privilege of being exposed to. It's wonderful.
I love that. Same, honestly.
Yeah, dance is great.
A lifesaver to really put it up there where it deserves to be. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I noticed that when I first talked to you on Teams.
Yeah. We were just going.
It went for an hour and more.
You can't stop talking.
Can't stop talking.
Yeah.
But now we can be real friends. Like now that the episode's
This was
over.
this was the test. Understood? Yeah.
You passed
this is
the
the
test.
level. This is the like craziest test I've taken to be
did
approved
so
by a
good.
person. It's great. It's awesome.